typically, right? And if you work hard, that's under the sun, but not always, which is the problem, right? What do we call that? Like they get the big break, isn't that what it is? Or I'm thinking like entrepreneurs, like right place, right time. That's another way we say it, right? A lucky break. That's what we say. Lucky break, right? First mover. I don't know. There's all sorts of things. And then of course everybody's like, if only I had known, that when Steve Jobs came back, I was about ready to click the buy button. I didn't have any money, but I thought I'd spend some money anyway to buy Apple stock in 2000. What was it? No, it was 2000. 2001, 2002, it was $20 a share. And now you would have 10x'd. Of course, I wouldn't have held it all the way till now either. I would have sold it long. Right? So this is what kind of wisdom is that? All right. Yeah, some of us are late to the party, but it doesn't matter. All right, so, even 2x is pretty good returns compared to holding it in US dollars in the bank account and getting 4%. What did we get on the CD? Yeah, 4 or less. All right, which isn't even inflation. It's being inflated more than. All right, so here, that's earthly wisdom. All right, but here we're talking about this poor wise man, and that he by his wisdom, though he poor, delivered the whole city. And yet, no one remembered that same poor man. I think we can think about this in terms of, whatever the occasion. In warfare, clearly, it's the little things that actually win the war. It's probably not the general, right? Yeah, but it's or the one who saves the ship, right? Just by, or it's maybe like the Titanic, right? Whoever actually did sound the warning bell, I don't know what the story is, but so that some lives were saved. Even though everybody was saying, don't worry about it, no big deal. No, that is an iceberg, right? So it could be the wisdom of that poor man who's just standing out on the deck and sees it in an axe. But nobody knows his name. Right? Like, who was that? I don't know. Some guy. Right? So, where are we? On the handout. Yes. For its negatives, wisdom can still work some good. So now, we've had a lot of negative wisdom before this, but now we have a positive, right? Giving a concrete example, perhaps even a historic account. In an evil world, a wise person will often face impossible odds, but wisdom can turn the odds upside down. And I give you an example there from 1 Samuel 17. What story is that? Since it's been 2 weeks, I don't remember why I cited that one. Anybody remember? Chapter and verse? You're all really good at that by now, right? 1 Samuel 7 is the story of, this is with Eleazar keeping the ark, and with Samuel. So you'll have to go and read that story. I don't think we covered it in daily prayer, so we might have skipped over that one. All right. And then the son of David, that would be Jesus, is the most concrete example of this, right? That even though by his poverty, yet he made us rich. That's a confession of Christ. And Christ is our wisdom. He's the wisdom of God incarnate. He saved his church while facing impossible odds. And he took a small, scared, and skeptical a handful of disciples and promised his kingdom would grow and flourish in them by the means of the Spirit. God chose what is weak in this world to shame the strong. He chose what is foolish to shame the opposite of foolish. The wise, right, exactly. In this world, right, under the sun. And so that even the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. This is one of the things that's probably most challenging for us, is the means by which God chooses to deliver to us the fullness of his glory, the greatness of the forgiveness of sins in Christ Jesus. And you've probably heard so many sermons on this over the years, if you've been around a while, right? Like bread and wine. This is Christ's body and blood, which is amazing, and yet it's under these weak signs. Same thing with like water. How can water do such great things? Luther has us ask, right, in the Catechism? You have water, it comes out of the sink, it's in the lake, or whatever. It's like, what's so special about this water? How can it do such great things? It's the Word of God in and with the water that does it, right? And the same thing with preaching. Remember with Elijah, he comes, and there's the whirlwind, and there's the earthquake, and no, I'm not in those, he tells Elijah. And finally, he says, he's recognized in the still small voice, right, which is the voice of preaching. right? Even from a little person like me or like you, all right? So that's still true. This is still true. And though we be poor in the eyes of the world, yet we have the wisdom of Christ, and we can deliver the city, right? That is to save some. That's Christ working through us. Even if nobody ever remembers your name. So there's the blessing of obscurity, which I told Pastor Riley a couple weeks ago, and he's really caught on to that. That, some of us who have a tendency towards inflated egos, I think God intentionally puts in Podunkville, Minnesota, and says, go be pastor to them. Nobody will know you. It's fine. All right? Because you'll save some, right? Or God will, actually, through you again. So that's beautiful. So even though his actions, his wisdom is forgotten, and what did I write here? Everybody around them is smug and content in their safety. Maybe they minimize in their minds the seriousness of the threat they faced. And probably others were willing to take credit for what the poor wise men alone had done. This is, of course, typical of sinful human nature, to hate the good and to love the evil, to punish the good and reward the evil. You also think of, how frustrating it is when somebody else takes credit for your work, right? And but I think there's actually a joy to serving quietly and letting other people take credit for it, even if it was your idea or for whatever. It's like, well, because again, that keeps you humble, right? And the focus ought to be on what was the good that was accomplished. What happened that was the ship turned, or was the course corrected? And if that's true, then does it really matter who is the one who takes credit for it? No. The end result, right. And this is true for suffering and pain and difficulty. We often don't know how God is using that to course correct, or to repent us, or to change our minds. But the end result is actually the thing, right? And we don't want to just say, well, everything will be okay because heaven. That's true, right? But also he's working all things for good even now. Not just then, but also now. And that's the part we like to sidestep that. The problem with now is you don't have the benefit of perspective in the moment, right? So as we say, one of our little bits of proverbial hindsight is 2020. So you often, if it is revealed to you the benefit of what you just experienced, it's not until later, if at all, right? All right. On the back of the page there from 2 weeks ago, Tanda. With this perverted mindset, sinners also like to blot out from their memories any historic events that do not match up with their warped preferences. Sin infects people with an incredible amnesia for when wisdom and righteousness saved them and evil caused their downfall. Right? And there, Exodus 32, you think of the pilgrims in the wilderness on their way to the promised land, and it was so much better back in Egypt. What? We do this, any kind of historic event. What do we say about history? That it's written by the victors. Yeah. So, and since our country in particular has generally won, we are always the ones who are in the right then, for example. We've never done any wrong, not as Americans, no. Or maybe Vietnam. Okay, we'll give you Vietnam. Maybe Korea. Okay. Oh, maybe Afghanistan too? Not so sure. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And so you go through the list and you're like, oh. I mean, you could even argue that World War II, our lack of participation escalated the conflict, right? So, I mean, you're just like, and trying to estimate right or wrong. I know there's actually an expression that people use today. It's a colloquial thing. Both sidism. Have you heard this? It's really just a way of speaking realistically. What are you doing with your cup? It's a way of speaking realistically. It's like, well, let's look at things from both, from every perspective. It's like, okay, Putin was an aggressor, right? He invaded Donbass, but why? Let's ask that question. I'll say, was he, maybe, at least in his own mind, was he justified in what he did, or was he just, and we don't want to, because he's the bad guy and we're the good guys. You're like, well, then how come we've laundered hundreds of billions of dollars through Ukraine and we have no record of what it was even used for? That doesn't seem right. And I think when you say under the sun here, just remember, almost everybody is corrupt. No, Everyone is corrupt. Yeah, exactly. Corrupted by sin. And well, when push comes to shove, unless they're faithful and God has repented them and is repenting them constantly, they're going to act in their own self-interest. Whatever enriches them, gives them power, gives them authority, these sorts of things, right? And then those things end up corrupting you, right? And like I said, we forget like what actually happened. Like, no, it wasn't the king that saved us. It was that guy. Remember that guy? I'm like, no, don't remember that guy. I don't remember what happened. And it works both ways with negative things too. Sometimes people will listen to you, sometimes they will not, and you cannot anticipate which reaction will prevail. All right, so maybe that poor wise man kept, going out into the streets and pleading his cause before the king, and he would never listen. That's possible too, right? Regardless, a wise person always speaks the truth in love. In application, the truth of a person's statement cannot be assessed by the volume or emotion with which he says it, the so-called shouting contest, right? And then we have all sorts of other ways to try to convince people. Not only do we shout, then we call people names, right? Oh, you're just like Hitler, which is the trump card for anything, right? No pun intended. So, what? Oh, did I just associate Trump with Hitler again? Yeah. And that, hopefully this seems a little relevant to recent events in our history, right? Beware of mass hysteria, where fools congregate and whip themselves into a frenzy of utter falsehood. No matter what the masses talk themselves into, wisdom remains unchanged. The tumult of unbelievers often drowns out the still small voice, the gospel quietly spoken by believers. So while it's true in the world, it's also true in the church. It's like, but pastor. It's like, are you engaging in the actual, what was said, or are you just responding emotionally, or are you just echoing what other people have said to you, right? Is that just what, I'm trying to think what mom would say. She's listening. We'll say grandma would say, because grandma's in heaven, so I don't have to worry about that. Is that you speaking, or is that your friends speaking, or something like that, right? Yeah, exactly. And then we have war, which we'll get to. Oh, we didn't look at this again. Wisdom is better than strength. That's true. That's what the wise king would say. Nevertheless, a poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. So actually, those who recognize wisdom, I would suggest that God would compel them to commend the wise one, even if it's the peon down below. Do you know about NVIDIA, which is right now they're the company? Yeah, they're spending. They're making all these AI chips or things for large language models. Yeah, so they're number one growth company in the last probably 4 years, 5 years. And before that, it was crypto mining that they were big into, until things changed with that. In any case, their company is very interesting in that the CEO gets daily reports all the way down the chain of command. And so then at each level, they're supposed to give like 5 points. This is what I did today. This is what I learned today. Those sorts of things. And so that the authority structure is very much flattened. And so that the king could recognize people down below. There's a great book on this called Habit. And it was talking about Alcoa, Alcoa, the aluminum company. They were having the most workplace accidents. They were unprofitable. And the way they turned it around is they added a suggestion box on the line. And they promised that whatever you write, it's fine. We're not going to hold it against you. And that the plant manager would respond to every complaint or every criticism or hopefully every, we could do this, it would be safer or it would be better. And the whole company turned around just by those in authority listening to those who are doing the work. Yeah. That's very interesting. So that's what he's saying here. Even though they're not heard and despised, they should be heard, right? Even if they were spoken by a child. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. I had that happen in chapel. Somebody said, oh, that's like this. And I said, oh, I'll use that in a sermon, right? Because it's a great idea. A great way to communicate it. Rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than the weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good, right? That's what we always default to, right? You see that I wrote that down. The powerful machinery of war employed by a powerful king was no match for the wisdom of the poor men. Or as we say, the pen is mightier than the sword. Yet the opposite is often true. Solomon is encouraging the wise person to continue working for the good, but keeping his eyes open to prevent him from becoming delusioned when his efforts meet failure. Folly will often snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. There was a warning. Be careful to not allow foolishness to... This is the accusation against one of the two political parties. Every time they seem to win, they seem to just somehow waste every win, and just trip over their own feet. You know who I'm talking about. What is wrong with you guys? You have the legislature, you have the Senate, barely in both. You've got the presidency, and nothing will happen, and they'll just fight with each other, and then snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Yep, that's exactly what happens. Take the win, man. But apply it to the church. The church in the world is the church militant, fighting the external forces of evil. But even within the Christian congregation, there will be spoilers who thwart the efforts inspired by what is good, right, and true. That's wise. Sometimes it only takes one to destroy much good. Rather than be discouraged, the congregation must press on in remembrance of the cross and resurrection, by which the one Savior overcame all our sins and every evil to bring us everlasting good. So that's the flip side of it. One might be wise and change the whole course of what we're doing. So I try to listen to every critique, right? On the other hand, one person could also sabotage the whole thing, right? By just becoming a naysayer, right? Or a constant grump. I've had that too, unfortunately. And if you don't respond to that in a way that's helpful and corrective, it grows, it brews. It's I was likened in my last parish as like a dark storm cloud that was sitting in one part of the church. To me, that was that's something I definitely need to address. If people are perceiving that there's like a cloud hovering in one part of the congregation where certain people sit, in other words, okay, that's really serious, right? If it's gotten to that point. All right, good. Any questions about this? It's nice because it's a little anecdote, right? The situation that he describes, and then he uses that to teach some wisdom. So this is very much like the parables in that regard, right? There's the story, and then there's the meaning of the story. But here he actually tells us. Yep. All right. So you can listen. If it's one person and he's speaking wisdom, and everybody else is shouting the opposite, that's okay, right? You can listen to the wisdom. If you know it's wise, then don't worry about what everybody else is shouting, and you don't have to get caught up in the mob. I know that's hard, isn't it? Because you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, but you also don't want to be on the wrong side of your friends. So that may also resonate for you. All right, now we're just going to be back to kind of more random wisdom sections. That's not really random, but especially here and now in chapter 10, there's not even really anecdotes. It's much like we see in Proverbs each day, right? So for the next two chapters, before we get to the conclusion in chapter 12. All right. So just more wisdom versus folly. Let's do those first 4 verses. See if we get through that.
Dead flies putrefy the perfumer's ointment and cause it to give off a foul odor. So does a little folly to one respected for wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Even when a fool walks along the way, he lacks wisdom, and he shows everyone that he is a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for conciliation pacifies great offenses.
All right. So maybe 2 and 3 go together. 3 might be a little bit different. 1 is a little different, although it could apply as well. I think we're still thinking. There does need to be a sense that this is still kingly wisdom. This is wisdom for those in authority, but I think it applies to everyone. This one because we have a kind of a colloquial way of saying this, right? How do we usually say this? Dead flies, don't be a fly in the ointment. Yeah, you've heard that expression. That's right. This is it. This is where it came from. Yeah, don't be a fly in the ointment. Right, because that little fly. I don't know. Have you ever made perfume? No. But you can imagine if you made a jar of perfume and one fly got in there, and then it just decayed, that would ruin the smell? I guess. That's what he's saying. He must know something of perfume, Mr. Solomon. Right? But he's using this as picture language, which is where people like Patrick have a little bit of a problem, because Patrick is highly literal. So we were talking about how, if you let yourself be angry, it's like a dam bursting open. And so then all he wants to think about is the Hoover Dam and the water. No, it's a figures. So we're not talking about literal ointment and literal flies, although that might be true, right? What are we talking about? Is what happens if you let that, if you're respected for wisdom and honor, and yet you have that one thing that you're just completely wrong about, and it just kind of corrupts it all, right? I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Do you have a good example of this? Somebody that's respected and trusted, and yet they're so wrong about one thing that you just can't trust them about anything.
I think of Herbert Hoover, who is remembered. He might have been a good president of them, but all he's remembered for is the Depression.
I know, and it's not even his fault. I mean, this is the problem with economics, is that there's always a lag effect. So the president either takes credit or disavows what happened from the last president. So he either takes credit for what they did or he disavows what they did. Doesn't take responsibility, because he can't really. You're talking, everything is offset, Yeah, and poor Hoover, unfortunately, family member too. So don't criticize my family. Was he from Iowa, right? Herbert Hoover?
I think so.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, and it's like, what caused the Depression? Well, it's tight money controls is what it was, but that's a whole other story. So, that was before him. You're right. So that's kind of the opposite, though. It's not somebody who's known for wisdom and honor, or maybe he was beforehand, but then that one event kind of just destroys him. I thought you were going to say J. Edgar Hoover, but I don't know about how much wisdom and honor he had in hindsight. Maybe it's just the historians I read or listen to, but yeah. Now, there's many examples. I didn't give you all of them, but almost universally in the early church, this was understood to refer to folks in the Christian congregation. So rather than it be one individual, generally, and you could apply this to traditions. So there's a lot of things commendable about, pick your church body, I don't know, Presbyterians, right? And yet they're so wrong about the Lord's Supper that it's like I couldn't participate in the Presbyterian church because they say it's all memorial remembrance and there's no actual body and blood for forgiveness, life, and salvation. It's like, how can you be so right about a lot of things? And then, right? Are you okay, James? Yeah. Okay, you had your head down. All right. Yeah. Well, let's read what I wrote and we'll see how this goes. Solomon, having laid a strong theological foundation, now moves from that one subject to another over and over. No clear divisions. We already said this. But you can think of it like a string of gems, right? Or pearls. Pearls of wisdom, we say. Remember, life in this fallen world is so nonsensical and tough that no one on his own can figure it out or endure it. He's already established that. He's been showing us that. That's elderly Solomon, no, it doesn't matter how much wisdom I give you. You're still not going to be able to make heads or tails of why this happens and what happens here and everything. Only by the fear of God can a person, that's faith or trust in God, can a person learn to cope with life's hardships. The gospel makes life worth it. The grace of God in Jesus Christ is more than enough to sustain us through all of life's problems and lead us into the life of the world to come. So I wanted to give you that because you need that foundation before you can really read these sorts of things. All right, so one sinner can destroy much good. Every worthwhile project will have at least one event or person as the fly in the ointment. There's your expression. Right? Fools are greatly influenced by a small dose of foolishness while resisting large doses of wisdom and honor. Right? They get caught up in the one thing. It's like, but ultimately, though, fools will be brought to ruin because of their own folly, which we've heard and will hear. So learn to anticipate the fly in the ointment and recognize when it is your own heart. All right, so it's easy to point out other people's faults and their foolishness, but as Jesus warns you, right, in regards to sin, which is what foolishness is pay attention to your own heart first. Don't worry so much about your brother's foolishness. Address your own, which is hard to do because you need them to tell you, because you don't see it. If you could see it, you wouldn't be a fool, right? Yeah, so external word. So here's from the Apostolic Constitutions. We don't have a particular order. This is a compilation of from different church fathers from the 1st and 2nd century, and then they compiled it and they gave it out to the church to say, here's how we've agreed as Christian churches to govern ourselves. And there's instructions for all sorts of things, and to address all sorts of situations. So if you like, the owner's manual for a Christian church. All right. We have something similar to that. Of course, we would say it's God's word, and then it's faithful exposition in the Book of Concord, our Lutheran confessions. Right. That's really our owner's manual. It tells me what to do. It tells me what's appropriate, what's not, etc. They had something similar. This was called the Apostolic Constitutions. The way this section starts, it actually starts with a bishop who's foolish and how to correct a foolish bishop, but then it moves into how to correct any fool, or why we would correct a fool. For the greater number of offenders there are, the greater is the mischief that is done by them. For sin which passes without correction grows worse and worse and spreads to others. Since a little leaven infects the whole lump, Jesus, and one thief spreads the abomination over a whole nation, and dead flies spoil the whole pot of sweet ointment. That's their translation. And when a king hearkens to unrighteous counsel, all the servants under him are wicked. That's from Proverbs. All right, so 4 different expressions there. 1, 2, 3, 5 different expressions, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. Or 4. It's 4. All right, and you know this. You know it from your own heart. If you don't address something, if you're angry, it just gets worse. It doesn't get better. It doesn't go away, right? You confess it, receive absolution for it, or seek to reconcile with the one who's offended you or you have offended. So one scabbed sheep, if not separated from those that are whole, infects the rest with the same distemper. And a man infected with the plague is to be avoided by all men. And a mad dog is dangerous to everyone that he touches. I mean, that's all very practical. We know those situations. You put down the dog or the sheep that's infected. That's what we did. We killed a whole flock at one point from a disease. If therefore we neglect to separate the transgressor from the church of God, we shall make the Lord's house a den of thieves. So it was toleration that got us the church of the Pharisees. It was because they tolerated it. It's just the ungodly teaching persisted because nobody corrected it. All right? For it is the bishop's duty, the overseer's duty, not to be silent in the case of offenders, but to rebuke them, to exhort them, to beat them down, to afflict them with fastings. So they would actually prescribe that they would fast for a time. That's interesting. That so he may strike a pious dread into the rest. For as he says, make ye the children of Israel pious. So that's another aspect of this, right? If you don't address the fly, others will think, well, that's okay, and then they'll persist in it too, right? So equal application, I think, is maybe the way to say that. And the problem is that not everybody's the same. Not every situation is the same. So this is what we tend to do, though. We tend to make the exceptions the rule rather than the rule be the rule and make exceptions, right? All right. Parents know this. Is that if you treat one child different than the other, I'm sorry, Luke. Life's not fair. Solomon's taught you that. But, yeah, why do they get away with it, right? Or one child observes another child and then mimics, and then you end up with double the trouble, as they say. Leah's making a face. She knows what I'm talking about. All right. So, yeah, I don't know. Is there other situations where we use that? Fly in the ointment? Don't be a fly in the ointment. It's usually directive, right? We would say it to somebody. Now you know where it comes from. Look at that. All right. Coffee must be good. People are going back for seconds. Yeah, it's Guatemala. All right. 2, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. Everybody knows that left-handed people are sinister, right?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
That's the Latin for left, is sinistera. I think I wrote this. No, I didn't actually write it, but you can really make too much of that, I think. Typically, the right hand is the dominant hand. So right hand is the hand of power or strength. And of course, The only negative that I could find for left-handed was with the sheep and the goats, right? And Jesus says, come sit at my right hand, come go to my left, right? But everything else, I mean, there's many left-handed people that are commended. The famous one is with Ehud, the big fat guy, the corpulent guy. And then the guy comes in and he just assumes that if he has a weapon, it's going to be in his right hand, but it's actually in his left. And then he was able to kill the ungodly king, right? And then there's probably some other left-handed people. Isn't there one of Gideon's commanders, I think? It's probably another one. Or you can think of when the wife of Zebedee, Salome, right, is her name, asked to have her son sit at Jesus' right and left hand. And she doesn't think like one's inferior to the other there. It's James and John, right? Sons of Zebedee. So right and left is not necessarily a problem. You can sit at God's left hand too. But to sit at God's right hand is reserved for Jesus. Yeah, it's reserved for Jesus. And some of that's just figure of speech. But a wise man's heart is at his right hand. That doesn't actually physically work, does it? Right, so what is that telling you about your heart if it's at your left? All men are foolish. Yeah, because it's on the left hand. Right-handed, left hand. It's not necessarily the right hand, it's left and right side. A fool's heart is at his left. Well, unfortunately, everybody, unless you have two hearts. Anybody have two hearts?
Only Spock.
Spock, and also the Time Lords. Yeah, Gallifreyans had two hearts too. All right. No, actually, you do have two hearts. I mean, we'll sing that from Psalm 51 in the offertory today. Create in me a clean heart, right? Takes the heart of stone, replaces it with a heart of flesh. That sounds like two hearts, doesn't it? We usually say we're of two minds, but I think and that's when we're kind of torn between two ideas. But we are of two hearts, and we would say sinner and saint, right? Clean heart, heart of stone, right? Stubborn unbelief, right? That's not what he's necessarily saying here, but that's certainly true. So note that a wise man's heart then is kind of not where you would expect it. So where's my thing here? Yeah, and then also right and left, two different directions. You could take it that way. Oh yeah, there's the example that I said. Left hand is the wrong side. Sorry, Don. You're a goat. But the right hand is exalted. It's considered this place of power, Psalm 118, or a victorious exaltation, Psalm 110. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The most quoted verse in the New Testament, of the Old Testament. Psalm 110, verse 1. But you'll see in the next verse, the fool is connected here. So we did this with Proverbs as well, but you can do it here. So you know, wisdom, fool. So the parallelism. All right, and there's more. So wise man's heart is at his right hand. The fool is at his left. In other words, he's walking along the wrong way, lacking wisdom. He's going the wrong direction. And by doing that, he actually shows everyone that he's a fool. That's also the hard thing for us to realize, is that foolishness isn't just a matter of the heart, but it's actually revealed in words and actions and deeds. But again, we live in a world now where we're not supposed to tell people they're being a fool. Or, what's the word we're not allowed to say in school? Oh, they say that's the S word, and I'm always like, no, not that one. Stupid. Yeah. You're not allowed to say someone is stupid. But then you can't tell them they're a fool. Now, we're not saying that they are. Their identity is baptized believer of God, child of God, forgiven, saint of God, right? And yet at the same time, you're a fool, right? And that means you do foolish things, you think foolish thoughts, you say foolish words, right? So maybe we should just say foolish instead of stupid. It's a little bit softer, I suppose. It used to be you had what the hip kids called the hard R. You don't know what I'm talking about. Luke does, yeah. You're not allowed to say that word anymore because mentally disabled people, right? But in other words, like, you're lacking wisdom. You're like wisdom equated to knowledge there, or insight, or mental capacity, which I can understand not saying that, but there is an appropriate use for it probably. But here we'll use fool, right? And you can tell when somebody's being a fool, and you can tell them, stop being a fool. And you're like, well, only God is judge. Okay, but who has God given to judge you? Is his judgment just up in heaven, or does he actually place people over you? Like children, do you say, when mom says, don't be an idiot, do you just ignore her because she's not God? Right? Or hard not. Well, there's that. That's fair enough. That's already the way of wisdom. So good job, Leah. Right? To recognize your foolishness is part of wisdom. So no, God puts people in place to correct you. I mean, this is what a good friend is, isn't it? That tells you when you're being dumb. Says, I'll pick on Mike. Mike, I think don't do that. You know better. Hey, let's get you a cab. Don't have another drink. You're already way past where you're supposed to be. I don't know if you're an alcoholic, but there we go. But that would be a wise friend, right? Say, no, it's not. One, it's not safe for you to drive, and two, they're looking out for you. They're trying to protect you. They don't want you to go take that path, because that could be. Everybody's like one moronic deed away from catastrophe, right? Whether it be finances or home or life, even. Just one stupid mistake. So there it is. So there's kind of two directions. The folly of unbelief will be evident to the wise believer if he opens his eyes and looks carefully at what the fool is doing. The wise can learn from the fool's folly, avoiding the same mistakes. I was listening to my parents' pastor this morning just a little bit, because I've been helping my sister fix her streaming. So I get the notification when they start streaming. So I just check in and see if it's still working. But he was talking about the use of the word Catholic. And this is one of those words that was corrupted by the Roman Church, actually. The Roman Church is the one who changed the creed to Christian, one holy Christian church in Germany. The Roman Catholics did that. The Lutherans kept saying Catholic. And then somehow that got flipped. Catholic just means of us or of the church, right? And do you believe, how many churches do you think there are? Well, what do we say in the creed? One holy. Yeah. So that's what Catholic means, of the whole, right? Which means of St. Benedict, St. Basil, of Jesus, of the apostles, of the prophets, the patriarchs, of those who live now, those who faithful believing now, whatever denomination they're a part of, those who faithfully confess Christ for their forgiveness, life, and salvation, and receive him in the gifts that he gives, right? And those to come, right? There's only one church, because there's only one baptism, one Lord, and one faith, right? That's what Catholic means. But unfortunately, if I say Catholic, you say, that means you hold to the Pope, and it's usually practical things, like, I don't know, whatever Roman Catholics do that you don't like, whatever that is, right? Which is, it's a fair criticism, but it's kind of foolish, because that's not what the word means. It's not how the word has been used. And anyway. So it goes. And you can see that, I hope. It's interesting, because even our Lutheran service book is confused. 2 of the 3 creeds, ecumenical creeds, we say Christian, and 1 we say Catholic. You're like, well, why? And then at the bottom, if you look in your Lutheran service book, you don't see this on the screen, but you just open the hymnal, and you just go, and you say, there's the creed, and then you go down to the bottom. You just have to read the very small print, where it says, Catholic means, or us men means all people. Christian, the ancient text actually reads Catholic, meaning of the whole church, as it confesses the wholeness of Christian doctrine. So we just put a footnote down there and say, actually, the word is, and you're like, well, why didn't you just put the word then? But, people have their things. All right, where were we? 2 directions, 2 ways. The wise man can learn from the fool. Oh, you can also learn from the fool. That's true too, right? So there is some, you don't, I know you're all good Germans. Are you all good Germans? We all have Germanic? Some days? Germans have a word for delighting in the fool's folly. I taught this to the children. You guys know it? Schadenfreude. That's when you're like, hey, they got what's coming to them. And then you kind of feel good about it. And they have a word for that. That's delighting in other person's hurt or harm. So give it to the Germans. They have a word for delighting in other people's suffering. We don't. That doesn't mean we can't learn from it too, though, right? And say, that's so sad. What can I learn from that? And and then you can pray for them too, that God would correct them. All right. And then kings again. If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, don't leave your post. Do not leave your post. For conciliation, I don't know, is that a good word? That's a good enough word. What's this one say? Calmness, that works too. Conciliation pacifies great offenses. All right? So when you're in the presence of somebody great and they get mad, stay calm, right? Don't respond in kind. If you respond to anger with anger, what ends up happening?
Escalates.
Everybody's angry, right? Escalates, right? So, yes, he's your ruler. Don't leave your post. So, don't just give up, right? But be calm, right? Or conciliatory, and that will pacify, whether it was your offense or their offense or whatever. You know, just stay cool. Stay cool, man. Well, that's Solomon. Chill out, man. Says Solomon. I mean, you see how we just end up defaulting to the same kind of proverbial expressions? We just use different ones. Chill out, man. Although people take that and they hate that. No, I'm not going to chill out. I'm really mad. I'm like, okay, fine. All right. Or as Jesus says, come to terms quickly with your accuser, right? Deference should be paid to earthly kings, although a wise subject to the king will entrust his whole life to the king of the universe. The King of Kings, right? The servant should not try to escape, circumvent, or undermine the king's authority. That does mean sometimes you suffer unjustly, right? Paul talks about that. You know, it's not always going to go well. You must learn how to get along with other sinners, especially those who can control your life. Christians are not exempt as citizens of two kingdoms, the civil realm and the church. The Christian forgives everyone who sins against him, just as God in Christ has forgiven all his sins. Yet, you know, that's before God or in the heavens. But under earth, a boss or a worker must deal with the sinful actions by his co-workers. God's people love their enemies, but choose their battles and enemies carefully. Right? So this is why it's almost a dichotomy. It's like it's both and. So you're like, well, on the one hand, I forgive you, but on the other hand, I can't live with you anymore. Right? I mean, this does happen. We don't have to like it. I would discourage it, but still, at the same time. Or you can't work there anymore because you just don't get along. And it's not okay, I guess, but there is such a thing as personality conflicts, right? That doesn't mean you can't forgive them or you couldn't go to church with them. Maybe that's the best thing, especially. Don't try to work with people that you go to church with. Oh, no. I see our teachers out in the hall. They voluntarily cover a multitude of sins, but remain wary of sin's potential to harm them. Or in other words, grace does not make sin permissible. All right? So what he's not saying is that you just ignore the king's anger. You do respond to it. But as you can, as you've been given, you forgive, you cover, right? Or eighth commandment, right? Yeah, everybody knows the king's mad and he's kind of a jerk, but speak well of him. Say everything in the kindest way. That's what we learn in the catechism, right? Why? It's this wisdom. Because it's not going to help, especially if they're given authority over you. You know, just make peace with them and move on, right? Or just pay the penalty, right? And just be done with it. You could fight it all the way up to the Supreme Court. It's probably not worth it. And it's just money anyway. I mean, this is very practical wisdom, but what is it? Oh, I was thinking about the Daniel Perry story. You follow Daniel Perry, who was defending the guys on the people on the subway from the guy all hopped up on drugs, and was making threats, violent threats, as the eyewitness testimony said in court, and eventually he was exonerated of every charge, which is amazing. In New York, of all places, yeah. But did you see his first interview after that?
Yeah.
The clip went around, right? But he said, they asked him, right, would you do it again? He's like, I couldn't live with myself if I just allowed him to do what he was threatening to do. And I just stood by idly and did nothing. And so he was saying, I'd go through all of that he's gone through, again, if I had to.
And just life would change.
Yeah, I mean, he got to go to the Army-Navy game and sit in the president's box. I don't know if that's worth it. I mean, Because he's not going to be able to work certain places. I mean, it's going to, yeah. It's a black mark, even if he was correct or just, right? So that's hard. It's hard to say to do until you have to do it, right? And you just say, this is the right course of action. It's not going to make anybody happy, but it is what I have to do for the sake of just being at peace. All right? And so it can work both ways. Forgive the king. And a wise ruler, remember this is Solomon talking about, does the same. Hopefully recognizes that this person, this underling, is trying to make peace and trying to calm things down and say, oh, thank you for recognizing that I lost my temper or whatever, and helping bring peace to the situation and commending him. Like he said with the poor wise man that saved the city, so also here, the one that tries to bring peace to a terrible situation. All right, these are pretty quick. We can do it. 5 through 7.
There is an evil I have seen under the sun, as an arrow proceed.
There, I scrolled up for you.
As an arrow proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, while the rich sit in a lowly place. I have seen servants on horses, while princes walk on the ground like servants.
Right. All right, so this probably, this resonates with everything we've been talking about today, right? It seems like everything's upside down sometimes. Yeah, that the evil thing is commended, the folly is commended. Look at that. You're like, whoa, okay. And then the rich, not literally rich, but those rich with wisdom, right? Folly and rich here are set against each other, are in the lowly place. The wisest person, like I said, is suffering in obscurity, right? But which is better, to be wise in faith in Christ and of His Word, or to be the rich and powerful of this world? Lifestyles of the rich and famous, who remembers that? Yeah, exactly. Now you watch those and you're like, oh, how sad, right? To live in such a opulent way, and yet having, in many cases, no faith. All right, I've seen servants on horses, right? Only the wealthy would wear horses, but those who ought to be servants, and those who ought to be princes, crawling on the ground like a servant. So it does seem everything seems to be upside down, and this is a great evil under the sun. And notice where it comes from? Yeah, it comes from the top down, right? So like we talked about, it's right for us to expose the folly of those who are in leadership positions. It's not wrong, because again, folly can be used as an example, a negative example, right? Don't be like them, right? But like using the power of the pardon to forgive your friends, not your enemies, that's backwards, right? Forgive your enemies, forgive those who you hate but who are unjustly tried, right? Or what would be another foolish thing? Spending the majority of your 4-year term on the beach in Delaware, right? It's foolish. There's to delegate all the tasks and just go to the beach. Right? And you can criticize that, and because what ends up happening is it's just like Reagan said, it's a trickle-down economy. And then well, if the president can do it, why can't I do it? Or if the pastor can do it, why can't I do it? That's that would be a local example. Or if mom and dad do it, why shouldn't I be able to do it? Right? That kind of thing. Right? It comes down, and we look at it, and why is the world upside down? Because people live upside down lives, especially those in authority. Especially those in authority. This is why the New Testament is very careful to give Paul to Timothy and Titus in particular, but also James, to command an obedient life of those who are the preachers of God's word. And so pastors are held to a higher standard. It's hard. I'm not perfect at it, and yet that's the standard because of this. Those who are presiding end up giving example to others downstream, if you like. Downstream. What did I write? I'll just read what I wrote, and then we'll leave it there. The malady is an inadvertent sin, still culpable, but bound to occur wherever some people dominate over others. Life is not fair, princess, including how people ascend the ladder of success and influence. Often the undeserving rise to the top, while the deserving are squelched and kept underfoot. Sin in the world establishes a corrupt system whereby fools can take control. This world naturally tends to the Peter principle. I just heard that this week. Have you heard that before? The Peter principle? It's the idiot is the one who's in charge, basically. Right? St. Peter. Right. He's the one that always steps out in front and says the dumb thing. And like, why is he the head? What? That doesn't make any sense. That people rise to the level of their incompetence. Truly wise people shy away from positions of authority. Right? You can think, like, I don't want to be president. You don't want to be governor. Who wants to be mayor of the town? No. Right? One, because it's too much authority, which you're at risk of your own pride taking control, or you actually are responsible. And you're already responsible for enough if you have a family, right? Or in my case, congregation or whatever. And it's hard enough. That's hard enough. Sin also forms the basis of a warped sense of value, where rewards and punishments have little correspondence to merit. We already had that back we have that back in Proverbs 1 and 2. Right? So it does seem that the fools are rewarded and the wise are punished. Life will continue to be unfair and power will continue to corrupt. This is all Solomon. The sooner the believer learns these things, the wiser and better off he will be. Ultimately, it is the Father who rewards what his righteous children do in secret, as we heard in our daily prayer this week, right? Your Father who hears in secret will reward you in secret. All right? And that's enough. That should be enough. You look around at the world and you're like, are we going to be able to fix the world? Solomon, he's tried. Remember, he had lots of wisdom. Middle-aged Solomon, book of Proverbs, right? We're going to make Israel great again. And what happens to Israel after Solomon? It splits, right? The big schism. And then the northern kingdom is conquered, and the southern kingdom apostates multiple times, sometimes repents, generally not. And there's no reconciliation. So at the end of his life, he recognizes that that's foolishness. Be a wise king, but don't think you're going to change sin. That only comes through Christ and his forgiveness. Yeah. And we can make the world a little bit better place, at least where we are, forgiving sins, right, in Jesus' name. And that's enough, right, because this world will ultimately be remade on the last day. All right, that's good. We'll end it there. Next time we'll talk about work, because everybody likes to talk about work. Work. Yeah. All right, and then we can move a little bit faster through these sections, right? This all sounds very familiar to us. All right, church time. See if I remember all the steps.